Architect, painter, and sculptor Tony Smith worked with Frank Lloyd Wright, designed a church with his friend Jackson Pollock, and created monumental abstract sculptures that revolutionized public art as we know it. Smith was born and lived and worked most of his life in South Orange, New Jersey. Several years ago, the Tony Smith Sculpture Project organized to raise money to bring Tao, a geometric steel sculpture by a native son, home. Playwright Tennessee Williams, a close friend of Tony Smith and his family, ended his eulogy for Smith with these words: "Tony Smith's work speaks to us more powerfully of God than that of any artist whose work I have known, and its inaccessibility to an easy comprehension, or perhaps to any comprehension at all, is the heart of that power."
He was on the cover of Time magazine in 1967 at a moment at which the change in scale of sculpture was the subject of the day. And the picture of Tony on the front shows him literally in his structure there, which was smoke. And why did they pick him and not Robert Grosvenor or not Barnett Newman? I think because smoke was the most radical structure in the way that it completely filled and used the space. It was extraordinarily complex and engaging both with its site, and it was very photogenic as well. Smith has an interesting story himself because he was somebody who had already had a history. He had been 20 years, he was an architect. He made this switch from architecture to sculpture in the early 60s. So he was a very meaty story, I think, more than almost anybody else of his contemporaries. His best friends were Jackson Pollock and Barnett Newman, and so he was actually of the abstract expressionist generation, and then was making the natural development within his work to work that people associated with contemporary sculpture, meaning minimalism, site-specific, large works. But for him, it was just a continuation.
I think my father had a very deep knowledge base that he was moving from, but he was very intuitive. You know, he had a base in architecture, but he worked in putting his things together from a maybe intellectual and emotional place together. And I think that is something that gave us tremendous permission as artists to trust ourselves and to trust our own knowledge and to work from that.
Also, I think he taught us a lot about scale, from making models and then to realize them in a larger scale, and also about materials, that we could really use any different kind of material and that was available, and things could be built easily, and maybe not easily, but things it was possible. It was possible to build all different kinds of things with all different materials.
In an industrial foundry, Tony Smith directs a skilled crew of metal workers to carry out his concepts in steel.
Of course, I have to be manipulating it all the time to get, put the different parts together. And at some point, I begin to think of how the piece would actually be stable, how it would orient, how it would lie firmly on the ground.
I'd love to stand on top of one of those, I just love it. It'd be so neat. And I like that one there because from here it looks like it's going to be just an ordinary shape like a square. When you walk around it, it's, you know, kind of different, kind of shocks you when you see that there's nothing on the other side.
I like a certain amount of mystery involved, which demands involvement on the part of the person seeing it. I think that the size of the work has something to do with the kinetic quality. It demands a certain amount of action, and I don't know why I find this desirable, but I seem to.
He was very involved with mathematics and biology and crystals, and he looked at his work of octahedron and tetrahedron as a space lattice, and so the negative space and the positive space were just as important. So for him it was a wonderful universe.
Having worked as a practicing builder and designer, you know, an architect or designer, it gave him a way to move from scale, you know, to move in scale and move in materials and envision things that were outside of his own making, hand making. You know, it freed, like as an artist, it sort of freed him from handicraft of making the things himself, because he had a practice of, just envisioning something and then having it fabricated. And, you know, he did have his work fabricated. You know, he called up a foundry and had his work, you know, built for him. You know, he said the only time he touched his work was when the photographers asked him to put his hand on it. You know, so I think that was immensely liberating.
This is a little model of Tau, and we build this model and have it here at the shop in order to not make any mistakes when we assembling the parts, because it's easy to get things backwards or flipped around. One interesting thing about this piece and Tony's work in particular is that it has at its root a space lattice, which is to say groupings of simple platonic solids like this four-sided tetrahedron and the eight-sided octahedron fill out the space. So you can see how these two pieces fit together, a tetrahedron and an octahedron, and then you can see how they nestle in together here. That kind of gives you a sense that all of the parts that Tau is made up of are clusters of these two basic solids.
The name is Tau, which is the Greek letter T, and Tony's nickname, a lot of people called him T, you know, so you could sort of say it's a signature piece, but it's not really that. One of the problems with abstract art is you're trying to make something that doesn't look like something in the world, but it always does, you know. So when he saw it looked like the letter T, he called it Tau and sort of got that out of the way.
The interesting thing about Smith is his works can't be made without those complex mathematical calculations. But he would not like it if you described a work mathematically. Lippincott needs all those complex calculations to build the structure, but those factored very little into the actual making of it. and into the evolution of the work. It's more poetic. It's more about poetry. Yet, he never could have made it without his experience as an architect and as a builder. He knew about structure. He knew about scale. He knew about how things need to stand up.
My father loved South Orange, New Jersey. Basically spent his entire life living here and died here. So, it was something that was just very deep in his own experience that he had chosen to come here. And obviously we came here growing up. So, it was very important to my mother, Jane Smith, to give this sculpture to the town. And, I think she would be very fulfilled that this has come to fruition after these years, and that we hope that you embrace it and love it as much as we have loved the experience of, spending our lives with our father's work. So thank you very much.